The photo came through on a Tuesday afternoon, an ordinary Tuesday, the kind where I was folding laundry and thinking about what to make for dinner. My sister's name flashed on the screen. A photo sent by mistake, meant for someone else entirely. I opened it without thinking, and in that single second, standing barefoot on my own kitchen floor, 8 years of my marriage turned into a lie I hadn't known I was living. My husband was holding 2 newborn babies. The caption underneath read, "Daddy loves you both." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there, phone in hand, and felt something inside me go completely, permanently still. My name is Laura Chen. I am 38 years old, and for most of my adult life, I believe patience was a virtue that eventually got rewarded. I am a forensic accountant by trade, which means I spend my days finding the small inconsistencies that people think no one will notice. A number that doesn't add up, a transaction that doesn't belong, a story that almost makes sense but doesn't quite. I built a career on trusting evidence over emotion. I just never thought I would need those skills at home. Marcus and I got married when I was 30. He was ambitious, funny, the kind of man who filled a room without trying. He co-owned a logistics company that was just starting to take off, and I loved watching him build something from nothing. We used to talk about the family we would have, how many kids, what we would name them, whether we would raise them in the city or move somewhere quieter. It felt inevitable. It felt like something that was simply going to happen to us the way summer follows spring. It didn't happen, not easily, and not for a long time. We tried for 2 years before we even sought help. Then came the appointments, the tests, the terminology that started to feel like a second language. IUI, IVF, hormone injections that left bruises on my stomach. I hid under looser shirts. We lost 3 pregnancies before they ever became anything more than a heartbeat on a screen. Each one a private grief I carried mostly alone, because Marcus always seemed to recover faster than I did. I used to lie awake at night doing the math in my head, the way I did with client files. Where did this go wrong? What did I miss? What could I have done differently? I blamed my body. I blamed stress, my job, the wine I had had one night before. I knew I was pregnant the first time. I blamed everything except the truth, because the truth wasn't something I had access to yet. Through all of it, Marcus held my hand in waiting rooms and told me the same thing over and over, like a promise he needed to keep saying out loud to make it real. We will get through this together. I believed him, the way you believe the sun will rise, without evidence, without question, simply because the alternative was unthinkable. My sister Diane was there too, or at least she seemed to be. 3 years younger than me, always warm, always available, with a hug or a casserole, or a call me any time that I took at face value. She used to tell me she admired my strength. She used to say she didn't know how I did it. I never once considered that admiration and envy can wear the exact same face. The day the photo came through, I had just gotten off a video call with a client, the kind of dull afternoon that makes up most of a life. I remember the light coming through the kitchen window at a low angle the way it does in late fall. I remember the phone buzzing twice, and then I remember looking down and seeing my husband's face. The same face that had told me only 3 weeks earlier that we should maybe try one more round of treatment, that we shouldn't give up yet. Looking down at 2 infants like they were the center of his entire world. Diane called almost immediately after. I picked up without saying anything. "Laura," she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this." I hung up. I didn't ask a single question. I didn't need to. 8 years of forensic training had taught me one thing above all else. Once you find the first inconsistency, you don't confront the person who created it. You gather everything first. You confirm the full shape of the lie before you ever let them know you have seen it. So I opened my laptop instead. I found a family law attorney with the highest rating in the city, a woman named Sandra Webb, and I booked the earliest appointment available. 2 days later, I sat across from her in an office that smelled like fresh coffee and expensive paper, and I signed the initial paperwork to begin divorce proceedings against my husband of 8 years. My hand didn't shake. I remember being almost surprised by that. I didn't tell Marcus. I didn't tell Diane I knew. I went home that night and made dinner like nothing had happened, because for the first time in years, I understood something with total clarity. I wasn't the one who needed to explain myself. The morning after I signed the paperwork, I woke up before sunrise and made coffee for one person instead of two, and I didn't feel a single ounce of guilt about it. Marcus had texted the night before, some casual message about a work trip that would keep him out of town for a few days. I read it twice, then I got to work. If there is one thing my career taught me, it is that people who are confident they will never get caught leave the messiest trails. They stop being careful because they have convinced themselves they do not need to be. I started with the credit card statements. We had always kept mostly separate accounts, a decision that had felt practical at the time and now felt almost prophetic. But there was a joint account we used for house expenses, and buried in months of grocery runs and utility payments, I found 4 separate charges to the same hotel in a suburb neither of us had any reason to visit. 2 nights each time, always a Thursday into a Friday. I cross-referenced the dates against my own calendar. The one on my phone that logs everything automatically, including location history, I had honestly forgotten I had turned on. 3 of those hotel dates lined up exactly with weeks I was recovering from IVF procedures. Weeks Marcus had told me he needed to clear his head by staying late at the office. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open until nearly 2 in the morning, and piece by piece, the last 3 years of my marriage rearranged themselves into something I barely recognized. Diane had told me more than once that she was simply the one driving Marcus to his appointments when I couldn't make it. A doctor's visit here, a follow-up there. I'm just helping out, she used to say, like it cost her nothing. I found records showing those appointments often happened on days Marcus had no medical visits scheduled at all. By the time I found the joint photo storage account, Marcus didn't know I still had access to a shared cloud folder from years earlier that had never been deactivated. I wasn't even surprised anymore. There were photos going back nearly 3 years. Diane at his office holiday party, standing just a little too close. A weekend getaway, logged under a business trip, with a beach visible in the background that was nowhere near any client site. They hadn't been careless exactly. They had simply never imagined I would look. I want to be honest about something. There is a particular kind of pain that comes from confirming a betrayal you already suspected, and it is different from the shock of discovering one you never saw coming. This was the second kind, and underneath the pain, something colder was taking shape. Clarity. For 8 years, I had absorbed every hard moment of our marriage as my own failure. My body, my fault, my burden to fix. Now I understood I had been carrying the weight of someone else's choices the entire time. I built a file. Every hotel charge, every mismatched alibi, every photo with a timestamp that told a truer story than either of them had ever told me out loud. I organized it the way I would organize evidence for a client, methodically, without commentary. Because the facts didn't need my anger attached to them. They spoke clearly enough on their own. I sent the entire file to Sandra 2 days later. She read through it in front of me during our second meeting, her expression unreadable in the practiced way of someone who has seen every version of heartbreak a marriage can produce. When she finally looked up, she simply said, "This is thorough." I told her I had had 8 years of practice, noticing what other people missed. It was 3 days after that meeting when my phone rang with a number I recognized but hadn't expected. Dorothy, Marcus's mother. We had always had a warm relationship, the kind built on genuine affection rather than obligation. She used to call just to check in, to ask about work, to tell me about her garden. This call felt different from the moment I answered. Her voice was thin, unsteady in a way I had never heard from her before. "Laura," she said, and then nothing for a long moment, just breathing on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, she was crying, trying and failing to keep her voice even. "Please," she said, "don't tell him yet." I stood very still in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I had seen that photo just over a week earlier, and felt the ground shift again beneath something I thought I already understood completely. "Don't tell him what, Dorothy?" I asked. She didn't answer the question. She just kept repeating those 4 words over and over, like they were the only thing holding her together. "Don't tell him yet. Don't tell him yet." I realized standing there, listening to my mother-in-law fall apart on the phone, that I had uncovered an affair. But somehow, impossibly, I had the growing sense that I had not yet uncovered the truth. I met Dorothy 2 days later at a small coffee shop, halfway between our houses. She was already seated when I arrived, hands wrapped so tightly around her cup that her knuckles had gone pale, and she looked older than I remembered. Not in years, but in something heavier, the kind of tired that comes from carrying a weight for far too long without setting it down. Before I had even taken off my coat, she said, "I need you to understand something. What I'm about to tell you, I should have said 8 years ago. I've regretted staying silent every single day since." She told me she had known something important, something that would have changed everything since almost the very beginning of our marriage. She said it in pieces, circling the actual information the way people do when they are afraid that saying it plainly will make it permanently real. "Does Diane know?" I asked, because that was the question sitting heaviest on my chest. Dorothy shook her head firmly. "No, Diane doesn't know any of this. Neither does Marcus." Her eyes met mine, and there was something almost pleading in them. "Only me," she said, "and one other person. Dr. Harrison, your old doctor." I felt my stomach tighten. Dr. Patricia Harrison had overseen nearly every stage of our fertility treatment 8 years earlier. The tests, the procedures, the countless conversations about odds and options. I hadn't spoken to her in years. Not since we had finally stopped treatment and tried to make peace with the life we had, instead of the one we had planned. Dorothy explained in pieces, her voice dropping almost to a whisper. There had been a report. Results from testing, back when Marcus and I were still trying everything we could. It had come to the house by mistake, addressed to him, and Dorothy had opened it without thinking. It wasn't routine. She had read it and understood immediately that if Marcus saw it, it would break something in him she didn't think could be repaired. So she had called Dr. Harrison directly and asked her, as a mother, to let her handle it in her own way, in her own time. Dr. Harrison had agreed, against her better judgment, because she had known the family for years. Dorothy looked down at the table. I never did right by anyone. I just delayed the pain and let it grow into something much bigger. I thought about all the pieces I had already gathered. The hotel receipts, the mismatched alibis, the photographs that told a truer story than either Marcus or Diane had ever told me out loud. I had assumed, walking into this conversation, that I understood the full shape of my own marriage's collapse. Sitting across from Dorothy, I realized I had only been looking at the surface of something much older and much stranger. "Dorothy," I said carefully, "what did that report say?" She reached into her purse with shaking hands and pulled out a small worn slip of paper. "Not the report itself," she explained, but a note she had written to herself the day she read it. "I can't tell you here," she said. Not like this, not in pieces. You deserve to see it properly. The way I should have shown Marcus 8 years ago, instead of hiding it in a drawer and telling myself I was protecting him. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. Whatever she was carrying, it had clearly cost her nearly a decade of peace. I need to see that file, I told her. Dorothy nodded slowly. Those babies changed everything, Laura, she said quietly, but not for the reason Marcus thinks. I called Dr. Harrison's office the next morning. When Dr. Harrison picked up, her voice carried a note of surprise that quickly shifted into something more careful. I need to see my old file, I told her. All of it. Every test. Every result from the year we were doing treatment together. Can I ask what has brought this on? Dorothy came to see me, I said simply. Come in this afternoon, she said. I'll pull everything myself. The clinic looked almost exactly as I remembered it. The same soft grey walls. The same watercolor prints meant to make devastating news feel gentler than it was. Dr. Harrison met me in her office rather than an exam room, a thick folder already waiting on her desk. Before I show you this, she said, I want you to know I have regretted my part in this for years. Dorothy came to me in a moment of real distress, and I made a choice I would not make again. She slid the folder toward me. I'm sorry, Laura, truly. I opened it with hands that were steadier than I expected. Inside were pages I recognized, hormone panels, ultrasound notes, the familiar shorthand of 8 years of trying. But near the back was a report I had never seen before, dated almost exactly 8 years earlier, addressed to Marcus specifically, never to me. I read through the medical language slowly, translating it in my head the way I had once translated financial statements for confused clients, until the meaning became unmistakable. The results weren't about me at all. They were about Marcus. The report showed clearly and clinically that the difficulty we had faced for years hadn't originated with my body the way I had spent nearly a decade believing. There was a male factor, finding significant enough that Dr. Harrison had recommended in writing that we discuss alternative paths forward together as a couple. That letter had gone home in an envelope addressed to Marcus. Dorothy had opened it by mistake, and instead of handing it to her son, she had made a decision alone in a moment of panic to protect him from a truth she thought he couldn't survive. I sat there in that quiet office and felt 8 years of self-blame rearrange itself into something entirely different. Every late night I had spent doing mental math on what I might have done wrong. Every procedure I had endured, believing my own body was the reason we were suffering. Every apology I had whispered to Marcus in the dark. Sorry I couldn't give him what he wanted. None of it had ever belonged to me in the first place. Why didn't she ever tell him? I asked, though some part of me already understood the shape of the answer. Fear, I think. Dr. Harrison said gently. Dorothy loved her son fiercely in the way some mothers do, where protecting him mattered more than the truth. She convinced herself that if he never knew, it would never have to hurt him. I don't think she considered what it would eventually cost you both. I thought about Diane, then about a photograph of Marcus holding 2 newborns, a caption calling him daddy, without hesitation, without question. If the report in front of me was accurate, and I had no reason left to doubt it, then those children weren't biologically his, which meant Diane either didn't know the truth herself, or she knew something even more complicated than an affair. I didn't say any of this out loud. I simply asked Dr. Harrison for copies of everything, and she made them for me without hesitation, sliding the fresh pages across her desk, like she was finally, after 8 years, allowed to do her job the way she should have from the start. I didn't confront Marcus that day. I didn't call Diane. I didn't even call Dorothy right away, though I knew I owed her some kind of response after everything she had finally told me. Instead, I drove home and sat in my car in the driveway for a long time, the folder resting on the passenger seat beside me. and I thought about every version of my marriage I had believed in over the years. None of them had been the complete truth. And now I was holding the piece that changed the meaning of everything else. When I finally called Dorothy that evening, my voice was calm in a way that seemed to surprise her. "I have the file," I told her. "I know what it says." She was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, there was something like relief threaded through her exhaustion, as if a burden she had carried alone for 8 years had finally partially been set back down. It was Dorothy who called me on a Thursday evening, her voice tight with something between dread and urgency. "Marcus is coming home tonight," she said. "He wants me to meet the babies properly." A pause. "He is bringing Diane." I understood immediately what she meant. "Margaret, you don't have to do anything you are not ready for. I've hidden this for 8 years, Laura," she said quietly. "I think it is time I stopped." I wasn't there when it happened, but Dorothy told me everything afterward in enough detail that I could see it clearly in my mind, almost as if I had been standing in the doorway myself. Marcus arrived first, letting himself in with the same easy confidence he carried into every room he had ever entered. Diane followed behind him, a baby carrier in each hand, her face carefully arranged into something between apology and pride. Dorothy told me later that Diane looked exhausted, the way new mothers do, but also lit up from somewhere underneath, the way people look when they believe they have finally gotten something they had wanted for a long time. Marcus set his bag down by the door and turned toward his mother with an expression Dorothy said she would never forget. Open, hopeful, almost boyish. The look of a man about to hand his mother the best news of his life. "Mom," he said, gesturing toward the twins Diane was carefully lifting from their carriers. "You're finally a grandmother." Dorothy told me the room went very quiet after that. She looked down at those 2 small faces, and something inside her simply gave out. All the years of holding this in, all the sleepless nights convincing herself she was protecting her son by staying silent, collapsed in on themselves the instant she saw those babies in his arms. She said she felt the blood leave her face, felt her legs go unsteady beneath her, and she had to reach for the back of a chair just to stay upright. Marcus noticed immediately, his smile faltering into confusion. "Mom, what's wrong?" She told me she opened her mouth, and the words that came out weren't the ones she had rehearsed 1,000 times over 8 long years. They came out smaller, more broken than she intended, but they were finally, after everything, true. "Wait," she whispered. "She didn't tell you." Marcus went still. Diane, standing just behind him with one baby still in her arms, went pale in a way Dorothy said she noticed immediately. A reaction that told her something important. Diane didn't know either. Whatever Dorothy was about to reveal, it was news to both of them in different ways, for different reasons. "What?" Marcus asked, his voice dropping into something careful, something that already sensed the ground shifting beneath him. Dorothy didn't answer right away. She told me she stood there for a long moment, looking between her son and the woman he had built a secret family with, and she felt the full weight of 8 years pressing down on that single, unbearable silence. She said she thought about me, about the years I had spent blaming my own body, apologizing for something that had never been my failure to begin with. She said that thought was what finally gave her the courage to move. Dorothy turned, walked into the study without another word, and knelt down in front of the small fireproof safe she had kept in the back of the closet for exactly this moment. The one she had told herself for 8 years she would open when she was ready, though some part of her had begun to wonder if that day would ever actually come. Her hands were shaking as she worked the combination. Marcus had followed her partway down the hall, standing in the doorway of the study, watching his mother kneel on the floor in front of a safe he hadn't known existed. Diane stood further back, still holding one of the twins, her face a mixture of confusion and something that looked, Dorothy said, almost like fear. Inside the safe was a single sealed envelope, worn soft at the edges from 8 years of being touched, considered and returned to its hiding place. Dorothy lifted it out with both hands, turned back toward her son, and for the first time in 8 years, she was finally ready to let him see everything it contained. She set it down on the coffee table between them. Charles stood over it for a moment without touching it, and Dorothy told me later she could see him bracing himself the way people do right before they step into cold water. "What is this?" he asked quietly. "Sit down," Dorothy said. "Please." He sat. Diane lowered herself onto the edge of the armchair across from him, still holding one of the twins against her shoulder, the baby fussing softly in the tense silence of the room. Dorothy opened the envelope herself, laid the contents out on the table, one page at a time. The original lab results, a letter from Dr. Harrison addressed directly to Marcus, and a handwritten note Dorothy had added years earlier. Dated the same week she had intercepted the original mail, Marcus picked up the medical report first. Dorothy watched his eyes move across the page slowly at first, then faster, then slower again as he reread certain lines, trying to make sense of language that wasn't especially complicated, but was clearly rearranging something fundamental in his understanding of the last 8 years of his life. This says, he started then stopped. He looked up at his mother. "This is about me." "Yes," Dorothy said softly. "This isn't Laura's file. It's yours." His voice had gone strange and flat in a way Dorothy said she had never heard from him before. "You are telling me the reason we couldn't have children was never her." Dorothy nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. 8 years, he said. 8 years I let her think it was her fault. She apologized to me, Mom. She used to cry and apologized to me, and I let her. His voice cracked on the last word. Because I never knew there was anything to say otherwise. Diane had gone very still across the room, the baby now quiet against her shoulder. Dorothy told me she watched something shift across Diane's face as the pieces started arranging themselves. If the report was accurate, if the male factor diagnosis 8 years earlier had been real and unresolved, then these children conceived with Marcus during their affair weren't likely to share his biology either. The same condition that had made conception nearly impossible with me would have made it just as unlikely with her. "Marcus," Diane said carefully, "what does this mean?" He didn't answer her. He was still looking at his mother, something raw and furious building behind his eyes. "You knew," he said. "You have known for 8 years, and you let me believe." He couldn't finish the sentence. He stood up abruptly, paper still in his hand, and started pacing. "I was trying to protect you," Dorothy said, her voice breaking. "I know that is not an excuse. I know what it cost you both. I have hated myself every single day since. Protect me from what?" Marcus's voice rose for the first time. "From the truth, from a piece of paper. You let me watch my wife blame herself for 8 years. You let me watch her go through procedures, through losses, through everything, thinking it was her body failing us, when the whole time..." He stopped, pressing the heel of his hand against his forehead, like he was trying to physically hold his thoughts together. Diane stood slowly, shifting the baby onto her hip. "If what this says is true," she said quietly, "then these babies..." She couldn't finish either. The room fell into a silence heavier than anything that had come before it. Dorothy told me that Marcus finally turned toward Diane, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with love and everything, to do with the sudden cold understanding that whatever they had built together over the past 3 years had been built on the exact same broken foundation as the marriage he had just destroyed. He looked at the report scattered across the coffee table, then at his mother, then at Diane holding a child that might not carry his blood at all. Dorothy said His face went through something she could only describe as a kind of collapse. Not physical, but internal. "I need to see Laura," he said finally, his voice hollow. His mother called after him once, but he was already moving, grabbing his keys, pulling the front door open before anyone could stop him. What Marcus didn't know yet, driving toward my house with 8 years of buried truth cracking open behind him, was that some doors, once they have closed all the way, don't open again just because someone finally understands why they should have stayed shut. Marcus showed up at my house a little after 9 that night. I watched his headlights sweep across the living room wall before I even heard the car door, and I knew with a strange kind of calm exactly what this visit was about. I didn't rush to the door. I finished folding the towel I was holding, set it down on the counter, and walked over at my own pace. He looked different standing on my porch than he had in 8 years of marriage. Undone in a way I had never seen from him. His collar askew, his eyes red-rimmed like a man who had been crying in his car for the length of the drive over. He was still holding the medical report, creased now from being gripped too tightly. "You knew," he said before I had even opened the door fully. "Nicole, you knew, didn't you?" "About the report? I found out 2 weeks ago," I said. "The same way I found out about Diane. By accident." He flinched at her name. "Laura, I swear to you, I had no idea any of this." "I know," I said, "and I meant it." That was the strange part. Standing there on my own porch, looking at the wreckage of a man who had just learned that 8 years of guilt he had let me carry alone had never belonged to me. I felt something closer to sorrow for him than anger. Not enough sorrow to change what I had already decided. Just enough to remember that he too had been living inside a lie someone else constructed, even if he had built plenty of his own lies on top of it. "Can I come in?" he asked. "Please, I just need to talk." I let him in. Not because I owed him anything, but because I wanted this conversation to happen on my terms, in my space, where I could end it whenever I chose to. We sat in the living room, where we had spent 8 years of holidays and quiet evenings, and he told me everything. How his mother had shown him the file, how Diane had gone pale, realizing the twins likely weren't biologically his either, how the affair he had built with such careful confidence had crumbled apart in the space of 10 minutes. He talked fast, almost desperate. "I'm not asking you to forgive Diane," he said. "I'm not even asking you to forgive me for the affair. I know that's inexcusable. But Laura, if I had known, if my mother had just told me the truth 8 years ago, none of this would have happened." I let him finish. "You're right," I said finally. "The lie wasn't yours. Your mother made a choice she shouldn't have made, and she is going to carry that for the rest of her life." I paused. "But you are wrong about one thing. This didn't start with your mother's secret. It started the day you decided that whatever you were missing at home, you were entitled to go find somewhere else, with my sister, without ever once telling me you were struggling." "I didn't know how to say it," he said quietly. "You were already carrying so much, so you let me carry more," I said. "You let me believe I was the reason we couldn't have a family for 8 years, while you built one with someone else. The medical report doesn't undo that, Marcus. It explains part of the pain. It doesn't erase the choice you made in response to it." He didn't have an answer for that. I watched something in his face finally accept what I was saying. The fight going out of him the way it does, when someone realizes the argument they have been building the whole drive over doesn't actually hold up once. It is spoken out loud. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice smaller than I had heard it in years. "Now," I said, "the divorce moves forward. Nothing about tonight changes that." He nodded slowly, staring down at his hands, at the report still creased between his fingers. "And Diane? That is not my concern anymore," I said. And I found, saying it out loud, that it was true. Marcus left a little before midnight. I stood at the window and watched his taillights disappear down the same street they had come from, and I felt for the first time in 2 weeks something settle inside my chest, instead of tighten. For 8 years, I had measured my worth against a story that was never true. I understood now that the ending of my marriage had never really been about a photograph, or a betrayal, or even a secret buried in a medical file. It had been about the moment I finally stopped waiting for someone else to tell me the truth and went and found it myself. The final mediation moved quickly. Sandra had done her work well, and there was very little left to contest. I had asked for nothing more than what I was entitled to. I didn't need to punish Marcus through the numbers. The truth had already done more damage than any settlement could. Marcus looked smaller somehow than the man I had married. Though I understood that had less to do with the room and more to do with the 3 weeks he had just lived through. His mother's secret had cost him more than a decade of misplaced guilt. It had cost him the relationship he had built to replace our marriage. I had heard secondhand that Diane had already moved out of state with the twins, unwilling to remain in a place that only reminded her of a foundation that had never been what she believed. Marcus hadn't fought to stop her. Some things, once they crack all the way through, aren't worth the effort of pretending they can be repaired. When Marcus saw me across the table, he tried one last time. "Laura," he said quietly before the formal proceedings began, "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking anyway. Is there any version of this where we try again?" I looked at him for a long moment, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel by that point. Not anger, not even sadness, but a kind of quiet finality. The way you feel when you finish reading the last page of a book you already know the ending to. "There isn't," I said. "Not because I can't forgive you, Marcus. I think in time I probably will. But forgiveness was never going to be the same thing as staying." He didn't argue. He simply nodded, and something in his shoulders relaxed, like a part of him had been waiting to hear exactly that, even as another part of him had hoped for something different. When it was finally over, when the last signature had been placed and the last document filed, I stood outside the courthouse in the late morning light and felt for the first time in 8 years entirely unaccountable to anyone else's version of my life. Dorothy called me that evening. She didn't ask for forgiveness outright. I think she understood better than most that forgiveness isn't something you can request and receive on the same day. She simply told me she was proud of how I had handled everything, and that she hoped someday we might still find a way to know each other, even without Marcus standing between us. I told her I would like that. I meant it. Dorothy's silence had cost all of us dearly, but I had watched her spend the last month trying, in whatever way she could, to make it right. That mattered to me more than she probably realized. A year after the divorce was finalized, I used part of the settlement to start a small foundation, one that helps couples navigate infertility treatment with real transparency, full access to their own medical information, and support that doesn't leave anyone carrying blame that was never theirs to carry in the first place. I named it after no one in particular. It didn't need my story attached to it to matter. It just needed to exist. I think about those 8 years often, not with bitterness, but with a strange kind of gratitude for the woman they eventually made me. I spent so long believing I had failed at the one thing I wanted most. I know now that I never failed at anything. I simply trusted people who weren't honest enough to deserve it. For 8 years, I blame myself. I will not waste another day doing that. Sometimes the greatest strength isn't making someone suffer. It is refusing to carry their lies any longer.